Jay-Z, the legendary rapper and businessman, decided to spend his evening at Crescendo, one of the fanciest restaurants in New York City. The place was known for its sparkling chandeliers, fancy dishes, and exclusive vibe. It was where the rich and famous gathered, dressed in expensive suits and glittering gowns. The streets outside were alive with sleek cars and the glow of city lights. But inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was calm, sophisticated, and quiet. Unlike the typical crowd, Jay-Z didn't arrive in a flashy car or wear a designer suit. He walked in wearing a plain black hoodie, simple jeans, and a pair of sneakers that had clearly seen better days. He wasn't trying to stand out. He just wanted to enjoy a peaceful meal without drawing attention. At the front desk stood Claire, a young hostess who had been working at Crescendo for years. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her uniform was spotless. She always held herself with pride, making sure that the restaurant kept its reputation as one of the best in the city. But Claire had a habit of judging people by how they looked, and when she saw Jay-Z step inside, she couldn't hide her displeasure. Claire gave him a polite but distant smile. "Good evening," she said in a crisp tone. Her eyes scanned his outfit, lingering on his sneakers. To her, it looked like he didn't belong in such an elegant place. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her voice cool and formal. Jay-Z smiled warmly. "No reservation," he said calmly. "I was hoping you might have a table for one." Claire hesitated, her professional smile faltering for a moment. She had seen this before, people walking in without reservations, hoping to have a taste of the high life. In her mind, Jay-Z looked like someone who didn't understand what Crescendo was about. She tilted her head slightly and replied, "This is a fine dining restaurant. Are you sure this is the kind of place you're looking for?" Her tone wasn't just polite, it was sharp, almost mocking. Several nearby diners overheard her words and glanced toward the entrance. Some looked amused, while others frowned at her condescending tone. Jay-Z, however, didn't seem bothered at all. "Yes, I'm sure," he said with a gentle nod. His voice was steady, his expression calm. Claire pursed her lips. She wanted to say more, to warn him about the prices or the dress code, but something about his calm demeanor stopped her. She forced a tight smile and gestured toward the dining area. "Follow me," she said. Instead of leading him to one of the main tables under the bright chandeliers, Claire guided Jay-Z to a corner table near the kitchen. The area was dimly lit, and the clatter of dishes and faint smells of cleaning supplies filled the air. It was the least desirable spot in the entire restaurant. Claire set the menu on the table with a little too much force and gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Here you go," she said. "I hope this suits you." Jay-Z took his seat without a word of complaint. He opened the menu and began to read, completely ignoring Claire's rudeness. His calm, unbothered attitude only seemed to irritate her more. She lingered by the table for a moment, waiting for him to show some sign of discomfort or embarrassment. But when he didn't, she turned and walked away, her lips curling into a smirk. At a nearby table, an older couple had been quietly observing the scene. The woman leaned closer to her husband and whispered, "Isn't that Jay-Z? What is she doing, treating him like that?" Her husband nodded thoughtfully. "It is him," he murmured. "I don't think she realizes who he is. Even if she doesn't, it's no excuse for such poor behavior." Across the room, Elena, a young woman in a sleek black dress, also noticed what was happening. She frowned as she watched Claire's dismissive attitude. "That's so unprofessional," she whispered to her friend. "I don't care who he is. You don't treat a customer like that." Her friend shrugged. "Let's see how it plays out," he said, though even he seemed uncomfortable. Claire, meanwhile, returned to the hostess stand, where her coworker Ben was organizing the reservation list. She leaned in and whispered to him, glancing over her shoulder toward Jay-Z's table. "Do you see that guy?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "He doesn't belong here. He's probably just here to say he ate at Crescendo. Watch. He'll panic when he sees the prices." Ben, a soft-spoken young man, looked uneasy. He glanced toward Jay-Z, who was calmly scanning the menu. "He looks pretty relaxed to me," Ben said cautiously. Claire rolled her eyes. "He's putting on a show," she said. "People like him always do." Back at his table, Jay-Z remained, unbothered by the whispers and judgmental glances. He read the menu carefully, occasionally glancing around the room. When Claire finally returned to take his order, she approached with the same air of superiority. "Have you decided?" she asked, her tone overly polite. Jay-Z looked up with a warm smile. "I'll have the Wagyu steak," he said. "Medium rare." Claire raised an eyebrow. "That's $400, she said pointedly, as if to test him. Jay-Z's smile didn't waver. "That's fine," he said. Claire hesitated for a moment, then smirked. "Very well," she said. "I'll get that started for you." As she walked away, she whispered to Ben, "He's just trying to act like he belongs. Watch, he won't even make it to dessert." But as the evening went on, Claire's confidence began to waver. Jay-Z's calm demeanor didn't falter, no matter how much she tried to rattle him. Other diners started to take notice of her behavior, their whispers growing louder. The older couple shook their heads in disapproval, and Elena crossed her arms, her annoyance evident. "He's handling this better than I would," Elena muttered. "That hostess is completely out of line." The tension in the restaurant grew thicker with every passing moment. Jay-Z, seated quietly in his corner, had become the center of attention, though he didn't seem to notice or care. And though Claire continued to act smug, the disapproving stares from the other diners were beginning to chip away at her confidence. The stage was set, and the night was far from over. The stage was indeed set, and every person in Crescendo felt the tension in the air. Jay-Z remained in his corner, unbothered and calm, while the rest of the restaurant seemed to hang on the edge of something they couldn't quite define. Claire continued her work, serving other tables and pretending not to notice the whispers and side glances aimed at her. But deep down, a small seed of doubt had been planted. At the kitchen counter, Claire leaned against the edge, her frustration bubbling over. "I don't get it," she muttered to her co-worker Ben. "Why isn't he reacting? People like him usually can't handle the pressure in places like this." Ben frowned, his discomfort growing. "Maybe he's just here to enjoy his meal," he said carefully. "He doesn't seem to care about proving anything." Claire scoffed. "You're too naive, Ben. People like him don't come to places like this unless they want to show off. Just wait. He'll probably leave before the bill even arrives." But the more Claire tried to convince herself, the more uncertain she became. Across the room, diners were whispering among themselves, their curiosity and disapproval directed toward her. At a table near the center of the room, an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, exchanged knowing glances. Mrs. Harper shook her head softly. "I've never seen anything like this," she murmured. "He's sitting there so calmly while she acts like a fool." Mr. Harper nodded, setting down his wine glass. "It's admirable," he said. "Most people would have reacted by now, but he hasn't even flinched. That young woman doesn't realize she's embarrassing herself, not him." Nearby, Elena and her friend Max continued to watch. Elena's irritation had only grown. "I can't stand how she's treating him," Elena said, her voice low but firm. "It's so unprofessional." Max leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "It's almost like he's waiting for something," he said. "He hasn't said a word about how she's treating him, but you can tell he knows exactly what's going on." Elena nodded. "He's definitely not an ordinary customer." As Claire carried on, Jay-Z continued to eat his meal with a calm grace that only added to the growing unease in the restaurant. Every motion, cutting his steak, lifting his fork, taking a sip of water, seemed deliberate and steady. It was as though he had all the time in the world. But beneath his calm exterior, Jay-Z was carefully observing everything. He noticed the way Claire avoided looking directly at him. He saw the uncomfortable glances from the other staff, the subtle nods of approval from some diners, and the disapproving stares from others. He didn't need to say anything. The room was already speaking for him. Finally, Claire couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed a tray of drinks and made her way to his table, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her steps were deliberate, her posture stiff, and her smile forced. When she reached the table, she placed the tray down with a little more force than necessary and said, "How's your meal? I hope it's what you were expecting." Jay-Z looked up at her, his expression calm, but with an unmistakable air of authority. "It's great," he said simply. "Thank you." Claire blinked, her irritation barely concealed. She waited for him to say more, to give her an opening to continue her passive-aggressive comments. But he didn't. Instead, he returned to his meal as though nothing had happened. Across the room, Elena couldn't hold back any longer. She leaned forward and whispered to Max, "She's digging herself into a hole, and she doesn't even realize it." Max chuckled softly. "She's definitely underestimating him," he said. "This is going to end badly for her." At the center table, Mr. Harper turned to his wife. "Do you think he's going to say something?" he asked. Mrs. Harper shook her head. "He doesn't need to," she replied. "Everyone can see what's happening. She's embarrassing herself without any help from him." The quiet tension in the room continued to grow, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And then, just as Claire was returning to the kitchen, the door to the restaurant swung open. In walked Crescendo's manager, Mr. Turner, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He scanned the room quickly, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. As he approached the hostess stand, Ben stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Turner," Ben said, his voice low, "there's, a situation." Mr. Turner raised an eyebrow. "What kind of situation?" he asked. Ben hesitated, glancing toward Jay-Z's table. "You might want to take a look for yourself." Mr. Turner turned his gaze toward the far corner of the restaurant, where Jay-Z sat calmly finishing his meal. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, and he straightened his posture. Without a word, he made his way across the room, the soft hum of conversations quieting as diners noticed his purposeful stride. When Mr. Turner reached Jay-Z's table, he gave a slight bow of respect. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," he said, addressing Jay-Z by his last name. "I apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced tonight. If I had known you were coming, I would have ensured everything was perfect." Claire, who had been standing near the kitchen, froze. Her heart sank as she realized the weight of what was happening. "Mr. Carter?" she whispered to herself. Her face turned pale, and her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of a nearby counter. Jay-Z looked up at Mr. Turner, his expression calm but with a hint of warmth. "It's no problem," he said. "I just came for a quiet dinner." "I hope everything has been to your satisfaction," Mr. Turner said, his tone earnest. "If there's anything we can do to improve your experience, please let me know." Jay-Z nodded. "Everything's been fine," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "But I think we should have a quick chat with the staff before I leave." Mr. Turner's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Of course," he said quickly. "I'll arrange it right away." As Mr. Turner turned to address the staff, Claire felt her legs grow weak. She knew what was coming, and there was no escaping it. The entire restaurant had been watching, and now the truth was clear to everyone. The entire restaurant had been watching, and now the truth was clear to everyone. Claire stood frozen near the counter, her face pale as Mr. Turner walked to the center of the room. The restaurant was silent except for the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Every set of eyes was on her, on Jay-Z, and on the unspoken tension that had filled Crescendo all evening. Mr. Turner clapped his hands lightly to gather the staff's attention. "Everyone, can I have a moment?" he said, his voice firm but composed. The servers and kitchen staff hesitated, unsure of what was about to happen, but they quickly gathered near the front of the restaurant. Jay-Z stood up from his table, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. His movements were slow and deliberate, every step filled with quiet confidence. He looked around the room, his calm gaze meeting those of the diners and staff alike. There was no anger in his expression, only an unshakable sense of purpose. "First, I want to thank you all for the work you do here," Jay-Z began, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. "This is a beautiful restaurant, and the care you put into the experience is clear." The staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure where his words were leading. Claire shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. "But tonight," Jay-Z continued, his tone steady, "something important was missing. Respect. Respect for the people who come here, no matter who they are, what they wear, or how they look." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Diners nodded subtly, their earlier whispers now replaced by silent agreement. At a table near the center, Mr. Harper leaned closer to his wife. "He's not just teaching the staff," he murmured. "He's teaching all of us." Jay-Z turned his attention to the staff, his gaze landing briefly on Claire. "Every person who walks through those doors deserves to feel welcome. You don't need to know who they are to show them kindness. Respect isn't something you give only to people you recognize or admire. It's something you give because it's the right thing to do." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the floor. The weight of her actions, her judgmental words, and her dismissive behavior hit her like a tidal wave. She felt small, exposed, and ashamed. Jay-Z's voice softened, though his words remained firm. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after. Are we willing to learn? Are we willing to grow?" The staff nodded slowly, the message sinking in. Even Claire, overwhelmed with emotion, managed a small nod. She knew she had been wrong, and she knew she had a long way to go to make things right. Jay-Z glanced at Mr. Turner, who stood with his head slightly bowed, his expression a mix of respect and resolve. "I hope you'll take this as an opportunity to make Crescendo even better," Jay-Z said. "This isn't just a place to serve food, it's a place to bring people together. And that starts with respect." The room erupted in quiet applause, the sound filled with admiration and understanding. Jay-Z nodded his thanks, then turned back to his table to pick up his jacket. As he walked toward the door, the diners watched in silence, their gazes filled with newfound respect for the man who had turned a quiet dinner into an unforgettable lesson. Claire stepped forward hesitantly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Mr. Carter?" she called softly. Jay-Z stopped and turned to face her. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was wrong. I didn't treat you with the respect you deserved. and I deeply regret it." Jay-Z regarded her for a moment, his expression calm. "Thank you for saying that," he said gently. "The important thing is to do better from now on. We all have that chance." With those words, he turned and walked out the door, leaving the restaurant in stunned silence. The glow of the city lights reflected on the glass as the door closed. Behind him, marking the end of a night no one in Crescendo would forget. As Jay-Z stepped into the cool night air, his mind was calm. Tonight wasn't about proving anything. It was about reminding people of the power of kindness and respect. He knew the lesson would stay with them long after the plates were cleared and the lights dimmed. The restaurant remained still for a moment longer before the diners began to talk quietly, their voices filled with awe. Mr. Harper raised his glass and said softly, "To learning and growing. May we all take something away from tonight." And with that, the story of Jay-Z's quiet evening at Crescendo came to an end. What happens next? Want more stories about the power of compassion, overcoming judgment, and the strength it takes to make a difference? Click on the screen to watch the next story that will inspire you to see the world and each other in a whole new way. Don't miss it.